Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy. And I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse.
All right. So today we are talking about, really just the need for perseverance. But I don't think anybody likes that word very much. It's like just a big, huge word. So we're just talking about just try again. Just try again.
Yeah, I don't know what it is though about the word perseverance, but you're right. Nobody does like it. So I think
if I titled this episode, why perseverance is necessary, no one would click on it.
Yeah, no, it's maybe it was overused or something, but it's a biblical word. It is a word in the Bible. Perseverance is called for. And it was St. Paul, right? St. Paul calls us to persevere in faith. So
it's just not flashy.
maybe.
And I think that is actually ultimately what we're going to get to in this episode is what we're going to be talking about. It's not flashy.
Yeah.
It's not about, learning a bunch of new things. It's not about, it's not that you need to go out on more date nights or that you need to buy a bunch of fancy things or buy new lingerie or it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's that if your sex life isn't where you want it to be right now and you've tried something, it's time to try again.
Yeah.
Either you need to try the same thing again, right? And maybe you're trying to talk to your husband about sex. Maybe you listen to our episodes about talking to your husband about sex every day. And it kind of started and then it fizzled out. Well, try again. Set it up again. And maybe tweak it a little. Whatever you did last time didn't quite work. Let's tweak it. Let's modify how we approached our husband about it. Let's modify, the time of day that we set aside. I'm just going to use this example of this was your goal. You wanted to talk to your husband every day about sex. And it's just, it fizzled out.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't even need to change anything, but you just need to try again. You just need to
keep
persevere more and keep at it and keep reminding.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this on the podcast before too, of a lot of times we as humans, something will be really important to me, right? And then I'll tell someone else and it is not at all important to them because it's never crossed their mind, right?
Yeah.
So we'll keep on this same example of talking to your husband every day about sex. Maybe you've been listening to this podcast all year, all of 2024. And I guess this podcast episode probably just came out right at the beginning of 2025. So let's say you were listening all last year.
True, yeah.
And you heard our episode about talking to your husband every day about sex. And then in subsequent episodes, you heard us mentioning that idea. And then later on in the year, you heard us revisit that topic. And you're you've been thinking about this for a year. It's been on your mind. It has become very, very important to you. And then you approached your husband about it. It was the first time he'd ever heard it. You talked to him in one conversation and it didn't go anywhere. That's not your husband's fault. And it's not your fault either. There's no one is at fault here. It's that the relative importance level is vastly different because you've been thinking about it and you've been stewing on it and thinking in your head, oh my gosh, this is going to fix everything. It's going to make everything better. This is absolutely what we need to do. And then you came to your husband and you're like, hey, I have this thing and it's going to make everything better. Let's do it. And your husband's like, oh, okay. But then again, it fizzles out. It's not because your husband doesn't care to make things better. It's just because he's got 500 other things on his mind that maybe aren't things that are important to you.
Yeah.
Right. But so we just need to keep at it.
Yeah.
Try again. Persevere. Right.
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Before we get to the rest of the episode, I have a question for you. Is sexual pleasure something that seems just out of grasp? or maybe something you've never or rarely actually experienced. Sexual pleasure, and orgasm in particular, is something that a lot of Catholic women struggle with. Whether it's because of a misunderstanding of the point of sexual pleasure and God's design for it, or a lifetime of suppressing anything to do with sex because it was bad or dirty, maybe shame from past sexual experiences, or maybe just that no one ever stopped to walk you through an in-depth anatomical diagram and tell you about how female pleasure works. Whatever it is, orgasm is a confusing jumble of anatomy, mindset, partner dynamics, and a lot more. And it's not something that you want to Google, because you never know what you're going to come across on the internet, and sifting through secular crap is just not something you have time for. That is why I created the Orgasm course for Catholic women. This course walks you through everything from anatomy to mindset to theology to the partner aspect of sex and orgasm, and it is all deeply rooted in Catholic truth. There is nowhere else that you can get all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff. Check out the Orgasm course for Catholic women at vinesinfullbloom.com/orgasm or click the link in the show notes.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point that sometimes it seems like we try something once and then it's like, okay, that didn't work. So now I need to go back to the drawing board. And we're always trying to reinvent the wheel when really, and like, listen, don't get me wrong. Like there's something to be said for like being open to new ways of doing things or to new things, trying new things and whatever. Like that's fine. But I think that you can get to a point, and I say I think because I know from experience that you can get to a point where you honestly feel a little hopeless and overwhelmed because you're like, well, I've tried all of these things and none of it has worked. Mm-hmm. Right? When maybe I went ahead and tried all of those things one time. So it's like, yeah, instead of just kind of like giving it one go, persistence, and as much as we hate the word perseverance, is necessary and it's required. It reminds me of, and I mentioned this to Ellen before, it reminds me of my one son is a very, very picky eater, and doctor's orders sent us to occupational therapy to kind of start working on being more open to trying new things and all this kind of stuff. So in his OT sessions, it's like I have to make a food that he doesn't particularly care for, but is like open to trying or whatever. And it's literally like the tiniest bite. Like last time it was lasagna, right? So it was like, okay, first of all, who doesn't like lasagna? That too. But
my husband doesn't like particularly like lasagna. It's more just because he doesn't like ricotta cheese. But there are people out there who don't like lasagna.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's like the texture of the ricotta, I think, is like what really like weirds him out. So anyway. So
he will eat it though, because I love lasagna. So I'll make lasagna and be like, I'm sorry, you're just like, you're not doing it.
My child will not. He will refuse. But so what we worked on is like, okay, well, let's essentially deconstruct this lasagna and try little bits at a time. And it was like the tiniest little crumb of pasta and then the tiniest crumb of the meat sauce. We didn't even get to the ricotta. You know what I mean? And like, that's it. And she keeps talking to him about how your taste buds are constantly changing. And so you have to be constantly exposing yourself to these new foods to develop a taste for them. And I think we can take that principle and apply it to this, right? Like maybe something didn't work the one time you try it. Maybe it didn't work the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time that you tried it. But if you continue to expose yourself, right? And when we're talking about our sex life, we need to be careful to make sure we're talking about things that are not dangerous and not morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
Right?
We want morally appropriate things and things that aren't going to hurt us.
It's so funny. There are so many times in these episodes that we connect food and sex, which is hysterical.
I know, right?
They're just like two of our like constant appetites.
Food and sex and then prayer and sex. We like
food
connect
and sex
those
and prayer
two
and sex.
things.
They're just like synonymous all the time. Anyway,
I want a shirt that says that.
Yeah. So true. Maybe we can like market it and sell it to our listeners.
It's fantastic. I don't know if anybody would actually wear that shirt out of the house though.
Yeah,
food
but
and
definitely
sex,
no,
prayer
definitely
and sex.
not any
actually,
woman. Anyway.
It could be a shirt that just says food, prayer, and then we know what it means.
Or just food, prayer, and. Like food, prayer, ampersand.
No, but
That's
then
it.
people would ask what the and is for, right? But like,
And then it
you
could be
just
a
want
fun
to like, you have
conversation
this
to
like
have.
incognito shirt that nobody understands.
They're like, what are you
Food,
wearing?
prayer.
That is funny. Anyway, but the point being, again, when we're talking about our sex life, we want to make sure that these things we're remaining open to, right, are safe and not morally reprehensible. Okay. As long as those two things are met. Like, maybe they're not working, but maybe we haven't given them a fair shot. And maybe if we continue trying, right, like we will develop a taste for them. Or we might just, maybe they're hard to work in one season, but as we continue trying and we move into different seasons of our life, all of a sudden we find that it is working or it will start working. And I think that's another point that we should really kind of mention is just seasons. You know, like like right now, we the Shavanuses are in a season of chaos. We are in a season of utter chaos. We have kids who are getting a little older, right? In their like preteen years who have activities. We've got things at home. We've got, you know, just like there's like constantly, we're driving a lot now. We moved. So we're like kind of driving further to school than we ever did before. We're driving further to the activities than we ever did before. Like there's a lot of car time and like it just feels like things are chaotic. And which is why we're like very much looking forward to the break that is coming up or will have happened by the time you're listening to this. But you know, like we're just in this season where connection is very hard and we have to be really intentional about it, you know? And so I think we're in a season where some of those things that we've tried in the past, they're just not going to fly right now. But I don't know, in a few months, hopefully we'll be kind of making it out of this season and those things might work again or might just start working, you know?
Yeah, I think that's really important to think about too of these seasons of like, yeah, if you tried something and maybe it's something that was working for a while and then it started not working. It started kind of fizzling out. Like, just take a look at your life. Mm-hmm. Is this a season right now that you just need to like, maybe it's just a little bit of waiting it out of like, oh, okay, you know what? If we get to the end of this, you know, school year, I don't know. That's kind of a long ways to wait at this point, but like,
there's a ways out.
Sometimes even if you can just notice that there is an end to this season, right? Maybe it's, oh, we just need to get to the end of this pregnancy or until my cycle returns postpartum. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
When is that cycle returning postpartum?
Always just elusive. We never really know.
We never know. It was different with both of mine. We'll see. We'll see.
Mine was always about the same, which was very nice.
Yeah, I had really different breastfeeding journeys with the first two, so it makes sense that they were different. Yeah. But then it's kind of like, well, what happens now? Like,
yeah, that's true.
But just recognizing that like our life is in seasons and these seasons do end and they do change. And just being prepared for that change can also be really helpful, right? Like, let's say you're in a really, really good season right now. Just recognize that like things will change. And it's not to say that like your life's going to get upended and be terrible. Like, but it's that the season that you're in right now will change and things will get different. And then you'll have to try again with some of the ways of connecting that you were or things with sex. Like, and here's kind of the reason why we wanted to talk about this today is I hear from a lot of you guys. I love hearing from you guys. Like, please send me emails. It's wonderful. I hear from a lot of you guys, though, that it's like, oh, you know, maybe I just will never orgasm. Maybe I just will never feel pleasure during sex. Like, when we start to have that kind of a thought of like, I've tried really hard. My husband's tried really hard, right? You're not necessarily blaming anyone, but it's like, we've tried really hard for me to have sexual pleasure and it just hasn't worked. And so therefore, like, maybe it's just not going to work for me. Yeah. As soon as you think that, that becomes true. Like, our brains are so powerful, so powerful. The things that we tell ourselves create the results in our lives.
Yeah.
They absolutely do. And so when we tell ourselves things like, I just don't think I'll ever experience sexual pleasure, then you are pretty much guaranteeing that you will not feel sexual pleasure, because your brain is also the most powerful sexual organ that we have.
Yeah.
So if you've told yourself all day long that you're not going to experience sexual pleasure, and then you get to sex at the end of the day and you maybe start to get a little aroused, but then like you've had this thought all day in your head that you're not going to experience sexual pleasure. And so then you're literally closed off to the possibility of experiencing sexual pleasure.
It's like your brain battling your body.
Exactly. And your brain, as crazy as it sounds, your brain wins every time. Like I love this thing that my fitness coach says a lot. Shout out to Brittany Pearson, Healthy Catholic Moms. I love her. She's amazing.
Love that. Shameless plug.
Yeah, exactly. It totally was shameless. I get no kickback from that. Go check her out. She's awesome. I really just love what she does. Healthy Catholic Moms is her Instagram handle. One of the things that she says, and I think this is like quoted from somebody else anyway, but it's like, when we feel like our body is going to give out, like let's say we've done like 10 push-ups and we're like, there's literally no way I could do one more push-up. We're actually only at like 60% of capacity. Like we tap out physically way earlier than our actual physical capacity because our brain tells us we can't.
Yeah.
Like your brain wins. It wins every single time. And so when you tell yourself that your relationship's never going to get better, when you tell yourself that you're never going to be able to experience sexual pleasure, when you tell yourself that you're never going to be able to experience sex without pain, right? When you tell yourself those things, they will absolutely come true.
Yeah.
So first of all, stop telling yourself that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stop it. But it is kind of hard to stop telling ourselves that.
It is.
And in order for our brain to work for us, we actually have to believe it, right? And so it's really easy to believe a negative thought like that, right? So if you've never experienced sexual pleasure, it is so easy to believe, I'm just not going to ever experience sexual pleasure, right? Because like that's been your experience. It's really hard to believe that you will experience sexual pleasure because you never have, right? So this is where we get into like some mindset work that becomes a little bit more difficult and a little bit more work. And this is where that same idea of perseverance, of trying again, is what we need to do, because it's pretty much impossible to just flip your thought and believe it to, I will experience sexual pleasure in this example. That's hard.
Yeah.
And you might tell yourself that and you're like, I don't actually believe that, right? And so then actually you've got this sub thought of like, I'm lying to myself and that's not true. And actually the opposite is true, right? So now you've just made it worse.
That's actually so funny you mentioned that, because that has been my problem for so long, going to like therapists and just being in counseling and stuff. Like cognitive behavioral therapy was never really very effective for me, because that was always, it's like, okay, I'm going to give myself these affirmations because I'm being told to give myself these affirmations, but I don't really believe these affirmations, so I don't know how effective they're actually going to be. And they never were. But I think you're exactly right. And I think it's important that we always tie it back to the spiritual, right? And remember, because we are body, soul, we are holistic creatures, holistic beings, that where we're trying to work with and heal and overcome the body, the soul is tied into that, right? So remembering, first of all, that God wants us to have a good sex life with our spouse, right? Like that's not nothing to him. That means something to him. Sex is the means by which he has chosen for his children to be created. So he has an investment in that, right?
He does.
So he wants...
God is really invested in your sex life. And he
very much invested in your sex life.
And he wants you to enjoy it because, let's be honest, he wants more kids. Like, I've said this before, but like, I love when people like reach out to me and they're like, well, I just don't know what God wants. I don't know if he's calling us to another child or not. Like, I'm trying to pray about what he ultimately wants. And I'm like, what he ultimately wants is more children, because that is the greatest good that he created in the created world. Like, we know that from Genesis,
Right.
that it was very good when he created the humans, right? And like, so we know that that's what he wants, but, we need to discern at what point we're called to that. And like, but like, I just, that phrase of like, what does God want right now? Well, he wants more kids.
He
always
always wants more kids. However,
he always wants more kids.
There may be times where he wants you to focus on something else, but yeah. But I think that remembering first off that God has an investment and that he does care about your sex life and whether or not you're orgasming, right? Like, that matters to him, because if it didn't, he just wouldn't have made it pleasurable to begin with, right? Secondly, to remember that I think that when we're talking, especially like you were mentioning, Ellen, with like your brain, kind of having to like combat your brain in a way, and your thoughts and your negative thoughts. We need to remember that we have a heart that was formed by God. And while we can like do all the mental work to try and change our brain, I think the surest way to change our brain is by changing our hearts first. And you alone, you did not make your heart, so you cannot change your heart alone, right? Your heart has to be changed by its maker. And in order to make that happen, you need to be going to God in prayer, asking him to change your heart. And once you feel and see the signs that your heart is being changed, all of a sudden your brain is changed, right? Like your thoughts become more positive. They become less negative. And when you're working on that together, I'll give you a total example, with kind of my husband and some of the things that we've been working through. It's just like, I have not been loving him well. And to me, it was just kind of like, well, I don't understand how I can love you any better. Like, I don't know what to do. And so what I started doing was I started going to St. Therese and asking her to instill her little ways of love in me on a daily basis, and just asking her to show me how to love him better in small little ways throughout the course of a day. And in doing that consistently over the course of even just a couple weeks, I started noticing that I was more patient with him, that was sort of finding like little touches and little things and little ways to kind of, just connect with him that I never really looked for before. So remembering that there's always a spiritual component to this. Like, I think we're so used to talking about sex from a secular standpoint and just like, well, what are the magic buttons that need to be pushed, and what are, and it's just, we have the gift of knowing that sex is a spiritual, like, there's a spiritual component to it, right? Not just a physical, secular component. And so we can go and tap in and access that spiritual component to help us with the physical component. And like, honestly, what a gift, because when you approach it from just the physical, holy cow, that's so much work. And like, work that may not end up being fruitful, right? Like, maybe not, So just remembering that we have that aid, and that, you can go to the saints, and you better be going to God, and just asking for that change of heart so that ultimately we can start experiencing a change of mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think I kind of left us with that mindset thing on a bit of a precipice, because I was like, oh, if you tell yourself a lie, then you feign it worse. And it's like, well, then what do I do? Right? How do I not do that? And so, right, that prayer is really important, but like, also what you can do is look at where your heart is right now. And so let's go back to the example of sexual pleasure. If you've been telling yourself, I'm just not going to experience sexual pleasure, then that's going to become true. If you just try to flip it, if you just try to flip it 180 and say, I will experience sexual pleasure, you're not going to believe that. So find a statement that you do actually believe. And so your heart, where's your heart at? You want to experience sexual pleasure, right? So the statement is, I desire sexual pleasure. That's a true statement that you can believe, right? And so, and now you have shifted your thinking into a much more positive place, right? Like ultimately, we want the thought to be, I will experience sexual pleasure, right?
Yeah.
But like, don't try to jump there if you don't believe that. Have a bridge thought, right? We're bridging to that thought. And if you have to bridge even one step back from that, right? So like, if you don't even believe that you want to experience sexual pleasure, and I know I've had people reach out to me about that. They're just like, I just don't even care, right?
Yeah.
Then like, put another want in there. I want to experience sexual pleasure, right? Because that can be a true statement. You can desire to have that desire, and then that becomes your prayer as well of, Lord, please give me this desire because I know it's good. Kathleen and Ellen keep saying it's good, and I keep listening to them, and I'm just like, I don't really believe them. So Lord, like, please give me this desire. So that's what can help us when we have those like really limiting thoughts, and just finding a thought that is true.
Yeah.
Is what we need to do. And then that thought can slowly change toward the ultimate thought that we want. Because like, I'll be honest, the reason I keep using this pleasure example is like this was my journey. I mean, this is like why I created the orgasm course, because I like didn't orgasm early on and learned how to. And I know that you can too.
Yeah.
Right? And so what it's going to take though is like, I was telling myself, well, like when we have sex, I'm just not going to experience pleasure. So I just like don't even want to have sex anymore. Right. And so it was creating this result of never having sex and therefore never practicing, never getting better, never trying something new, never trying again. Right. We need to keep trying.
Yeah.
Perseverance. But shifting that thought is what ultimately like helped me to reframe how the evening would go, right? And now if I think about sex, I mean, it's not really like a conscious immediate thought, but I know that in the back is like, I will experience sexual pleasure because that is part of sex now for me, right? That is a true statement in my head. And so therefore, like these thoughts that I have that I'm not even like really, really conscious of, they're creating that result. I know that I will experience sexual pleasure and therefore I am experiencing sexual pleasure, right? So that's the journey of the thought process that we're looking for here.
Yeah. Love it.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I think we hit it.
We kind of covered it.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.